It began with humiliation. Not a sudden one, but the slow, suffocating kind that tightens like a corset with every glance, every whisper, every polite smile that conceals cruelty. Lady Eleanor Whitcomb stood at the edge of her own family's ballroom that winter of 1817, watching her reputation unravel under 100 candlelit eyes. Music swelled, laughter rippled, and still, no one approached her. She was 22, beautiful in a quiet, ruinous way, too refined for pity, too proud for comfort. Yet tonight, even her pride could not disguise the truth. She had become the season's most elegant tragedy. The Whitcomb fortune was gone, dissolved in a storm of debts and speculation, leaving behind only a crumbling estate and a daughter too visible to vanish quietly. Society, always hungry for spectacle, circled her downfall like hounds. "Such grace," murmured a lady behind her fan, "and yet, no offers." The words brushed Eleanor's ear like frost. She lifted her chin. If her name was to be destroyed, it would not be for lack of composure. At the far end of the hall, the Duke of Ashbourne entered, tall, severe, draped in the cool authority of a man untouched by ruin. His return from Spain had been the talk of London, a decorated officer, a widower in all but name, whose heart, it was said, had been left on the battlefield. The crowd shifted as if the very air made way for him. Eleanor's mother, pale and trembling, darted forward with a smile that trembled on desperation. The Duke bowed, his movements precise, measured. When his gaze met Eleanor's across the room, something unreadable passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or the faint stirrings of pity. He crossed the ballroom slowly, his boots echoing against marble. Conversation dulled, and the orchestra faltered, as though London itself held its breath. Eleanor felt her pulse stumble. She had danced with many men in her seasons, charming, frivolous, forgettable, but this was different. There was gravity in his silence, an authority that neither flattered nor invited. When he stopped before her, the air thickened with expectation. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice low, even. "Might I speak with you?" Her mother's fan fluttered like a dying bird. Eleanor inclined her head and allowed him to lead her to the shadowed edge of the ballroom, where candlelight dimmed and whispers could not reach. There, amid the murmur of strings and perfume, he studied her face with the scrutiny of a man reading a map he once knew but had forgotten the language of. "Your family has suffered greatly," he began. No preamble, no softening courtesy. "I have long admired your composure." She answered carefully, "Admiration is a luxury few extend to the destitute, Your Grace." For the first time, a hint of emotion flickered in his eyes, something between respect and regret. "I am not offering charity," he said. "I am offering permanence." The words hung between them. The meaning was unmistakable. A proposal. Not of affection, not even of partnership, but of salvation. Her chest tightened, though she did not allow her expression to betray it. "You do not love me," she said quietly. "I am not certain I remember how to love," he replied. "But I would not dishonor you." Her throat burned. Around them, the ballroom gleamed with laughter, jewels, and careless delight, everything that had once been hers. And now here stood a man of formidable title and reputation, offering her safety at the cost of warmth. A cage of gold. A marriage without heartbeat. Yet behind him loomed her father's debts, her mother's pleading eyes, her family's name teetering on the edge of ruin. Eleanor's hands were still, her voice steady when she spoke. "Then I accept, Your Grace. If duty is all that remains to us, let us at least bear it with grace." He bowed, not deeply, not tenderly, but with the gravity of an oath. In the distance, someone gasped, and the orchestra, sensing drama, stumbled into a triumphant waltz. Within minutes, the news rippled through the ballroom like fire on silk. Lady Whitcomb was to wed the Duke of Ashbourne. By the time the night ended, pity had given way to envy. She was saved. The wedding took place 2 weeks later beneath a sky the color of pewter. Ashbourne stood beside her at the altar, his profile sharp as a blade, his vows spoken with perfect precision. When his gloved hand brushed hers, she felt no warmth. He did not look at her when he said, "I do." She did not cry when she whispered it back. They were bound by duty, not desire, two actors reciting lines written by circumstance. In the days that followed, London called it a triumph of propriety. A sensible match, the papers wrote. The Duke restores honor to a fallen house. But in the privacy of their carriage, Eleanor felt the emptiness between them stretch wider than the road ahead. He spoke little, gazing out at the rain. When he did, it was only to comment on matters of estate or appearance. She responded in kind. Words became currency, measured, spent carefully, until silence felt safer than speech. Ashbourne Manor awaited them, a fortress of grey stone perched above wild moors. It was magnificent, but its grandeur chilled her. The corridors were lined with portraits of men who had never smiled, women whose eyes seemed trained on her every movement. That first night, she sat by the fire in her chamber, still in her wedding gown, while he lingered at the door. "I will not trouble you," he said, his tone almost courteous. "We are husband and wife. Let that suffice." She bowed her head. "As you wish, your grace." The door closed softly, final as a verdict. The weeks turned to months, and then to years. The Duke left for his regiment in Spain, and his letters came rarely, brief and bloodless. In London, society began to whisper again. The Duchess of Ashbourne, abandoned already, poor creature. Eleanor attended balls alone, her ring glinting like armor. Suitors avoided her, women admired her restraint as one admires a marble statue. She learned to smile without joy, to move without purpose, to live within the narrow walls of reputation. Yet on certain nights, when the rain beat against the windows and thunder rolled across the sky, she would imagine his return. Not as the cold stranger she married, but as the man she might have loved if the world had not carved him into duty. She would touch the ring on her finger and wonder whether it bound him as tightly as it bound her. And so it was that 5 years passed in elegant silence, each season another performance, each letter another wound. Until one evening, as Eleanor stood before her mirror adjusting the pearls that had once belonged to her mother, a knock sounded at the door, firm, deliberate, unfamiliar after so many years. Her maid, pale with astonishment, appeared in the doorway. "Your Grace," the girl whispered, trembling, "the Duke, he has returned." Eleanor froze. The brush slipped from her fingers, scattering powder across the table like ash. In the distance, thunder rumbled low and close, as though the heavens themselves exhaled after years of holding breath. She rose slowly, her reflection pale but unbroken, and whispered to no one, "Then the silence ends tonight." It began with rain, wild, relentless, as though the sky itself had grown weary of restraint. The storm came before dusk, flooding the gravel roads that led to Ashbourne Manor. By the time the carriages reached its gates, every torch guttered in protest, and the servants whispered in awe. The Duke had returned. After 5 years of silence, of rumors and unanswered letters, he had come home. Eleanor stood in the entrance hall when the doors burst open. Lightning framed him, taller, leaner, the proud set of his shoulders softened by fatigue. His coat was soaked through, his eyes, darker than she remembered, held the hollowness of battlefields and sleepless nights. For one suspended heartbeat, neither spoke. Only the rain dared fill the silence. "Your Grace," she said at last, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "You are expected." He removed his gloves with deliberate care, as though her calm demanded an equal measure of control. "I did not think I was," he replied quietly. The words stung more than she allowed to show. "Duty seldom requires thought," she said, turning from him. He followed her gaze around the hall, the polished floors, the portraits untouched, the order she had preserved. "You've kept it well," he murmured. "I kept it as you left it," she answered. "Nothing here has changed." His eyes flicked toward her then, lingering a moment too long. "Nor have you," he said, though his tone was not kind, nor cruel, merely true. Dinner that night was a ceremony of silence. The servants, unsure whether to celebrate or retreat, hovered like ghosts. Eleanor sat across from him at the long mahogany table, a gulf of candlelight between them. His hand brushed the stem of his glass, but he did not drink. She ate little, her throat closing around every swallow. The rain beat steadily against the windows. "How long will you remain at Ashbourne?" she asked at last. His jaw tightened. "Indefinitely." Her heart stumbled. "Then Spain? Over." He did not elaborate. His gaze drifted toward the fire, its reflection flickering in his eyes like old memories. She studied him in that fragile quiet, the faint scar along his temple, the way his right hand trembled before he steadied it on the table. This was not the same man she had married, war had hollowed him. But whether it had carved room for tenderness or only deepened the void, she could not tell. After dinner, she withdrew to the drawing-room. The air there smelled of lavender and loneliness. She sat at her writing desk, pretending to review household accounts, though her hands trembled too violently to write. Through the open door, she heard his measured footsteps crossing the corridor, the soft click of his cane, an affectation, perhaps, or a necessity. When he appeared in the doorway, she straightened. "You are restless, Your Grace," she said without looking up. "As are you," he replied. "I had forgotten how silence fills these rooms." "Some silences are preferable," she said. "They ask for nothing." He stepped closer, the scent of rain and tobacco clinging to him. "And some demand too much." She lifted her eyes then, the flicker of candlelight catching the tears she refused to shed. "You left without a word," she said. "Not even farewell." "I thought it kinder." "Kindness," she whispered, "is not absence." He looked away first. "I buried too many men in Spain, Eleanor. I had no right to come back whole when better men did not. I would not bring that shadow to you." She rose, her voice breaking against restraint. You brought it all the same. A thunderclap shook the manor, and for a moment, both seemed to flinch, not from the sound, but from the truth. Later, when the house had gone still, Eleanor found herself wandering to his study. The room had remained untouched since his departure, though she had kept it clean. She traced her fingers along the shelves, the scent of old paper mingling with dust and damp air. On the desk lay a single object, his metal, polished until it gleamed like new. She froze. He had noticed it already, she could feel his presence before she turned. You kept it, he said from the doorway. It was yours, she replied softly. It was lost. Then I found it. He stepped into the room, closer than he should have. Why? She swallowed hard. Because it was the only part of you that returned. Something inside him faltered. His composure wavered like a candle's flame in draught. You should have thrown it away. Perhaps I should have, she said. But I did not marry a ghost, Edward. I only became one to match you. Her use of his name, the first in years, struck him like a wound reopened. He turned from her, gripping the back of the chair as though steadying himself against the past. I never meant for you to suffer, he said. Then why did you let me? He had no answer. Only the ticking of the clock filled the silence that followed, marking every second of their shared exile. When she finally left the study, her hands trembled around the folds of her gown. In the corridor, the candlelight wavered, throwing their shadows long against the walls, two strangers bound by the shape of memory. Days passed. The storm eased, but the tension between them did not. The servants resumed their work, uncertain whether to rejoice at their master's return or fear the sharp edge of his quiet. Eleanor performed her duties with flawless precision. She greeted guests, arranged flowers, oversaw the household accounts. Yet beneath her composure, something restless began to stir, a defiance she could neither suppress nor explain. Whispers reached her from the village. A colonel from Ashbourne's regiment had arrived, seeking an audience. The man came bearing a sealed letter, written in a delicate, foreign hand. He bowed deeply before her, placing it on a silver tray. For the Duke, he said, and left before she could inquire further. Alone in the study, she turned the envelope over in her hands. The script was elegant, intimate, unmistakably a woman's. Jealousy was beneath her, yet curiosity rose like a tide. The Duke's absence, the rumors of Madrid, the haunted look in his eyes, it all converged into a single, unbearable thought. She could have opened it. No one would know. Instead, she carried the letter to the hearth, her pulse thrumming in her ears. For a moment, she hesitated, torn between pride and pain. Then, with deliberate grace, she cast it into the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished into ash. When he entered moments later, the scent of smoke still lingered. I was told a letter arrived, he said. It did, she answered, meeting his gaze without flinching. And? I took care of it. His eyes narrowed. You read it? No, her voice did not waver. Some wounds, Edward, are not mine to expose. Something unspoken passed between them then, a fragile thread, half trust, half surrender. For the first time in years, he seemed uncertain, almost human. He opened his mouth as though to speak, then closed it again. Good night, Eleanor, he said finally. Good night, Your Grace. When he turned to leave, she noticed his hands were trembling. She waited until his footsteps faded, then leaned against the mantel, eyes fixed on the dying embers. Outside, thunder rolled across the moors one final time, distant but not gone. And from somewhere deep within the echoing halls of Ashbourne Manor, she thought she heard it, his voice, low and unsteady, whispering her name as though testing whether it still belonged to him. It began with silence, not the polite quiet of drawing rooms, but the raw, aching kind that follows after something inside the heart breaks. That night, the storm returned, clawing at the windows with wild insistence, as if the heavens refused to let Ashbourne Manor rest. The wind howled down the chimneys, and somewhere deep within its echo, the Duke dreamed of gunfire, of screams swallowed by the Spanish hills. He woke gasping, sweat clinging to his skin like remorse. The candles had guttered out, and darkness pressed close. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he heard it, a faint sound from down the corridor. Not thunder. Not dream. Her voice. Edward? He rose, disoriented, and followed the sound. Eleanor stood in the gallery, a candle trembling in her hand, its flame catching the pale curve of her face. She had not meant to call him by name, it slipped out, unguarded, like breath after drowning. Her eyes widened when he appeared, but she did not retreat. The servant said you were unwell, she murmured. I am not, he replied, though his pallor betrayed him. Her gaze swept over him, barefoot, shirt half undone, the composure of a duke stripped away. You look as though you've fought the storm itself, she said softly. Perhaps I have. A pause. Only the rain between them. Then he asked, why were you awake? She hesitated, then admitted, because you were. The confession hung there, fragile, terrifying. He took a step closer, candlelight drawing their shadows together on the wall. You burned that letter, he said quietly. Why? Her voice barely rose above the wind. Because I would not let another woman's ghost live here. He exhaled, the sound almost a laugh but not quite. You believe there was someone else? I believe there were many things you chose not to tell me. And you, he asked. How many things have you buried in silence? She met his eyes, steady. Enough to know that silence kills more surely than war. He flinched as if struck. For years he had faced cannon fire without trembling, yet her words undid him. You think I wished this distance? He said, voice rough. Do you know what it means to come back from the battlefield and find nothing left of the man you were? I could not touch you without remembering what my hands had done. You could have spoken, she whispered. You could have let me understand. Understand? His control slipped, anger flashing beneath grief. You would have pitied me. I could not bear that. Then you would rather I despised you? If it kept you untouched by what I have become, yes. Her candle flickered. You never gave me the chance to decide. Something shifted in him then, a quiet collapse, like stone yielding to time. I thought silence would protect you, he said, voice breaking. But it only imprisoned us both. For a long moment, neither moved. The storm raged, the candles hissed. Then she did something small yet seismic. She stepped closer, close enough that her candle's flame caught the trembling in his hands. Edward, she said, her tone soft but unyielding, you are not the only one haunted. He stared at her as though seeing her for the first time, not the cold duchess the world pitied, but the woman who had endured his absence with quiet, unflinching grace. He lifted a hand, stopping inches from her face, afraid to bridge the gap. May I? He asked. She nodded once. His fingertips brushed her cheek. It was nothing, and yet it was everything. In that fragile touch lay 5 years of silence, the ache of every unsent letter. His breath shuddered. Eleanor, he said, her name foreign on his tongue, I never knew how to hold peace after living so long with war. Then let this be your peace, she whispered. But his restraint faltered, and he stepped back, shaking his head. You don't understand. I am not whole. Neither am I, she said. But perhaps together, we might be less broken. He looked at her then as though the world had tilted, the walls of Ashbourne breathing again after years of stillness. Slowly, he sank to his knees before her. It was not grand or rehearsed, it was the surrender of a man who had nothing left to shield himself with. 5 years, he said hoarsely. 5 years of pride and cowardice. Every night I tried to write, and every night I burned the page. I thought if I kept my distance, I could remain the man you believed me to be. But that man died before the war ever ended. Her hands trembled, but she reached for him. And yet here you are? He looked up, eyes wet, haunted no longer by death but by love too long denied. Eleanor, if I stay here, if I let you forgive me, I fear I will never survive leaving again. Then don't leave, she said simply. The storm outside began to wane, thunder softening into distant murmurs. The candle between them burned low, its light turning gold and tender. He rose, slow and uncertain, his hand still in hers. Will you let me begin again? He asked. Only if you begin with the truth. He drew a breath that trembled in his chest. I loved you from the moment you refused to bow to me at our wedding. You stood there, proud even in ruin, and God forgive me, I loved you for it. But I did not know how to love without possession, so I called it duty instead. Her tears fell freely now, though her voice was steady. Then love me without armor, Edward. Love me as I am. He closed the distance between them. The kiss was not youthful or perfect, it was hesitant, aching, real. It tasted of rain and apology. When it broke, the house felt different, alive, awake. He rested his forehead against hers. If I had known this was what forgiveness felt like, he murmured, I would have begged for it sooner. Then beg no more, she said. Simply live. For the first time, he smiled, not the polite curve of a duke's mouth, but something unguarded, human. She thought then of the girl she had been at that ballroom years ago, desperate for a future, terrified of love. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned that dignity and longing need not be enemies. They stood in silence, watching the last of the candles die. Outside, the rain gentled into mist. The air smelled of wet earth and renewal. He took her hand and pressed his lips to her wrist, a gesture of devotion older than words. You saved me, he said. She shook her head. No. We saved each other. They might have stayed like that until morning, but the spell broke with a soft sound, the creak of a door at the far end of the hall. The servant who had once attended the Duke stepped forward, pale and hesitant. In his hands, he carried something small, wrapped in faded cloth. Forgive the intrusion, your grace, the man said quietly. This was found among the Duke's things when he returned. It bears your name, my lady. Eleanor frowned, taking the bundle. Inside was a sealed envelope, aged, frayed, addressed in the Duke's hand. Her heart stumbled. The ink was smudged, but the date was unmistakable, 5 years past. She looked up at him, eyes wide. I thought I burned them all, he whispered. She held the letter against her chest, her voice barely a breath. Then what did you keep, Edward? He met her gaze, unflinching now, the storm's echo still alive in his eyes. The one thing I could never destroy, he said. And though the rain had ceased, thunder rumbled once more, soft, distant, like a promise unfinished.